Scotland is a colony of England. Many will find that hard to believe, but it's true. I'll refer to places to go and find out more as part of this presentation, but this is about the cost to Scotland of that colonisation. The dictionary says that colonialism inflicts significant enduring costs on people that are colonised, with some costs for the coloniser initially. The cost includes social, economic, political, and environmental consequences. The last comment there about shaping the world we have today is that the empires caused unnatural borders, particularly in the Middle East and in Africa, which today generates all the conflict, as social groups which were divided by an arbitrary border have a problem today politically. But going on, I'm going to show you 5 definitions of each of these things here that I mentioned. So the first is economic exploitation. It's common sense. Colonizers, the reason they colonize is to make profit and money. So they extract vast resources, enriching themselves, leaving the colonized nations impoverished in several different ways. Another is political instability. Colonial borders disregard, as I've just mentioned, ethnic and cultural divisions. After independence, the colonizers have left behind political and social tensions in many countries that they were at. Likewise, social disruption. In some cases, but not all, there is environmental degradation as well, caused by stripping assets and stripping wealth out of the land with no thought for the future. In every case of colonialism, there's a huge cost in culture and identity for the people that have been colonized. So here are the main areas where colonialism costs the colonized problems. If you want to know more in the background to what I'm saying here, that justifies and explains that Scotland is a colony of England, please on YouTube find these videos and watch them. If you search in YouTube in the words shown here, you will find them. So moving on. In the past, it's difficult to know what actually happened, but what you have here from this document here, published in Edinburgh in 1880, referring to the period 1707 at the union of the two countries to 1830. And the general effect of it were long remembered in Scotland with bitterness and reprehension, and generations went to their grave ere the long-promised prosperity came. Ruin and desolation fell upon the country. In the towns the grass grew around the market crosses. The east coast trade was destroyed. The west was yet undeveloped. All the arsenals were emptied, the fortresses disarmed, and 2 royal palaces fell into ruin. Years of national torpor and accepted degradation followed, and to the Scot who ventured south, but a sorry welcome was he accorded. This is a very powerful statement, and it shows what the people of Scotland went through. Please look at the videos I mentioned on the previous screen. So, taking the first one, that's a repeat of what I've shown you already. Economic exploitation. Scotland's GDP per capita is well below countries of our size within the European area. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, and it's a measure of the wealth each person on average creates in that country's economy. So if you take the output of a country and divide it by the population, you get the GDP. But why has this happened? It's happened simply because of colonization. It's hard to believe when you look at the United Kingdom, but many Scots continue to live in or close to poverty in a very resource-rich country. Our infrastructure is poor when compared to England. Our country is not internationally competitive because it's restricted by London. The public service continues to struggle compared with our neighbouring states. Colonialism was the reason in the past why many Scots left and the population diminished. It is the reason today why Scotland struggles to bring up families. What Scotland's GDP, when you compare it with other countries, suggests is that within the UK Union, as much as 1/2 of Scotland's real wealth is plundered and goes south and does not get reinvested in Scotland. This is against the myth and the narrative of London that says that Scotland's helped by the Barnett formula. But the truth is, since records began in the 1880s, is that Scotland's been a net contributor of wealth to London in all those years and continues to be so. The fact that 1/2 of our wealth never comes back to us causes this degradation in our society. So here's the first of two examples. If you look at the GDP per capita by country, created from the IMF data, the International Monetary Fund, there's also the World Bank and the United Nations that produce such figures. I've chosen the IMF because it shows the UK in its best light. So what this shows is Ireland in the example here. Every person in the country, if you take that as a proportion of the total wealth of the country for that given year, every person in that country produced 108,920 American dollars of wealth. This is the UK figure, and this is their best figure. The United Nations says it was just above 48,000. But when you consider GDP, you have to consider population size. In millions, this is the population size of each country. As a comparison, Scotland's population today, 2025, is 5.4 million. And why is this important? If you look at the figures for China and you look at the figures for America, it looks like the GDP of China is just over 1/3 of America. This is because it has 3 times the population. So if you want to do a like-for-like comparison between China and America, you'd have to multiply the Chinese result by 3 and divide the American one by 3. So what about Scotland compared with all this? There's an organisation called Statista, which looks at areas of the world that aren't provided by the IMF and so on, because it looks at areas that are not sovereign states and therefore not published in those places. So this is the figures for Scotland for GDP according to those for each year. This area here in 08-09 shows the effect of the banking crisis, and the figures here around 2019-20 and so on is COVID. So this, if you convert it based on the same rate, dollar rate, as the English figures here from the UK, you get a comparison. Remember that the Scots figure is in the UK figure. Colonial theory, written by lots of academics and lots of professors, tell you that the price of colonialism is equivalent to the value of the economic plunder. So what is the price of economic plunder for Scots? Yet Scotland has huge resources. It has more resources, natural resources, than the whole of England, and compared with Europe, it's up there at the very top in natural resources. So why is Scotland so poor, relatively speaking, to other countries? Looking at figures, an independent Scotland should have roughly double the GDP it currently has. So it should be $75,000 per person, not $44,000 as at present. If you look at the actual 2023 GDP figures and estimate for Scotland the cost of the Union, it cost Scotland, if you compare it with other countries of our size, it cost Scotland between 150 and 200 billion a year lost. Within the UK, within the poorly run economy of the UK, Scotland's turnover in 24 was 187 billion. The Scottish Government gets 74 billion from the Barnett formula. But not all the powers are given to the Scottish Government. Some things are still controlled by London within Scotland, and they do a recharge through the GERS system, which, although the 28 of the 29 figures in GERS are estimates, it shows that the total cost of running Scotland is around 120 billion. That's the UK figures. So that means that the missing 67 billion in our current economy, in our current management, never comes back to Scotland. It's kept in England. And that's been going on since the Act of Union and the colonial attack in 1708. Another example. In 2024, a published paper said that the value of Scotland's electricity exports out of Scotland will be around 60 billion by 2030, and that was based on figures at the time in 24 in the UK of roughly 30 pence per kilowatt hour. There's huge investment going on just now, and that started in 2015, and it's still increasing within Scotland. The paper just mentioned predicted that we should be able to get £100 billion of retail sales a few years after 2030. That's huge wealth coming out of Scotland to the UK. Scotland uses 10% of its power. The rest leaves Scotland. Its wealth goes to London. Prior to 2016, there was no grid connection between England and Scotland. Scotland was self-sufficient and self-standing in energy generation. And yet, ironically, today, with Scotland producing all this power, including the power from North Sea oil and gas, Scotland businesses and houses pay more than any other part of the UK to connect to the grid. So how does it compare in Scotland, the cost of our electricity creation, compared to other oil producing countries? This is in dollars. The difference between these figures is tax. Also, what affects the Scottish figures and the UK figure is that the deals that the UK government made in the 70s and 80s with the oil companies were a joke, and they were in favour of the oil companies and the gas producers. We have no wealth from this at all. Yet look at Norway with $2.2 trillion worth of funds for the country. What the UK government did, it used the wealth from us to support the country in the collapse of manufacturing, which was created by London. During the hassles of 24, when people were moaning about the cost of electricity in the UK, Kenny McCaskill, a Scottish politician who is well versed on the power costs and power grids, worked out that the Scottish cost of electricity should be 8 pence per kilowatt to the people in Scotland. A huge loss. That is why fuel poverty exists in Scotland. It's a country that we should be able to provide lower energy costs. The high energy costs obviously affects the economy and industries and all businesses in the country. Yet, this news, our colonial administrators at Holyrood, as well as the national economic advisors that exist within the UK and Scotland, and the Chambers of Commerce, and the 19 universities, ignore these figures and Scotland's colonial reality. They ignore the truth and believe the myth of what's happening with regards to Scotland from the UK. Just imagine had Scotland not become a colony and it was allowed to grow and prosper like any other European country. Things could be so much better. We would be more competitive. We could build our own wind turbines and not, as today, import the wind turbines and so on from the Freeport's trick of Westminster. You should learn about Freeports. They're called ripping off the public and giving it to private enterprise. Asset stripping. That's what's going on. Moving on now to political instability. Colonial borders and problems. You can think of Africa and the Middle East, what these problems have caused when tribal groups and social groups are split by artificial borders. That causes huge problems. In this case, it doesn't exist for Scotland. It's not a problem here because the border between Scotland and England was firmed up in 1018 after the Battle of Careham. It was further confirmed and tweaked slightly in the 1237 Treaty of York. But we have weak colonial administration at Holyrood. We don't have control of our costs and our assets. We are an administered, controlled country, despite the fact that Scotland is a sovereign territory in its own right. And with regards to ethnic tensions and so on, there are no serious ethnic tensions between Scotland and England between people. However, if like me, you have worked during your working life all over England, you know that there is, especially if you go farther south, some feeling against Scots. People feel that we're a basket case and that Westminster keeps us going by handouts. When the reverse is true, we keep them going with our profits, despite the fact they should be so much higher than they are now. Colonialism disrupts the people that live in them. The cultural attack by immigration when 2 million people from England came in the 19th and 20th centuries replaced the 4.5 million Scots forcibly displaced and pushed to man and build the UK Empire. That caused huge disruption. There was land theft, and it was a death knell of ancient practices between people, state, and the lords that run the country and the different communities. But the main change has been through the colonisation is England's Bill of Rights was forced on Scotland's. Scotland's constitution and Scotland's history and Scotland's laws are totally different from England, and yet English laws are forced on Scotland. The environmental degradation that happened in Scotland was no different from that happened in the Industrial Revolution in England. The only big one that changed it is it caused the clearances to happen where people were forcibly moved off the land, forced overseas, and it created an artificial landscape on the hills. Trees were removed and they got rid of the life and the community structures that existed to replace them with sheep. The loss of culture in Scotland caused by this colonialism is huge. In 1872, London took over Scotland's education in an education bill that forced English onto Scotland and removed by force the teaching of Gaelic and Scots. Around the same period, Scots history was not taught in schools, and the history of empire and the history of England and kings and queens replaced, so much so that people in Scotland today haven't got a clue. This is the culture problem. This is the official narrative and the lie that has been told. We're told this was a voluntary union. It was not. My other videos show that. The myth of voluntary union started in 1954, and that was done on purpose politically to try and make the UN campaign to decolonise the world ignore Scotland. You may think that phrase people use in the language are looked down on. You've only got to look at the internet to see that that is true. Think about when you hear politicians. Think about when you hear people at universities and so on. How many people speak Scots? Being a broad Scots speaker, using the language, you're looked down on and promotion is suppressed. There are, of course, exceptions to this. So, in summary, what is the cost of colonisation? Basically, it's made Scotland inequality when you compare what we have with other countries of our size within Europe. Our skills and assets are exploited. The wealth and money from Scotland, the continuous profit that it generates the UK, continues to go. That's why they don't want to lose us. That's why they're fighting. If we, as they say, are a basket case, depending on the Barnett formula, then why would London keep Scotland in? Why not get rid of the cost? Because we're part of a colonial structure, we have no voice in the world. We lag behind similar sized countries in terms of prosperity and development. More wealth is removed from us than is returned, and that's using UK published figures. When compared, as I said, to the other countries in Europe, we are performing poorly. In fact, so is the UK. Its territory is violated all the time with the Bill of Rights. The union with England did not include the territory of Scotland. Scotland's territory is still sovereign and Scots and governed to the laws of Scotland. But the colonial masters over time have indoctrinated and made people believe the lie that we're all the same. The culture is still under attack today. To really appreciate this video, you have to look at my other videos listed at the beginning. I thank you for listening. Here are all the videos I've made so far on YouTube. If you go to Robert Anderson 9116 and you put that in, you'll find my channel. If you go into the YouTube search bar within YouTube and type in the names as listed here, you'll find the relevant videos. If you subscribe to my channel, you'll also get all the latest videos. I plan to create these videos as soon as possible. One may roll over to next year. My next one's going to be Scotland's colonial markers. On the 7th of March 2025, Liberation Scotland put a much researched paper towards the United Nations, and the submission states that Scotland is a colony of England, and that's gone to the Decolonisation Committee, and if we're successful in time, that will make the world know that Scotland is indeed a colony. That means that under the United Nations rules we will then get a referendum that England cannot interfere in to see if we want independence. My next video after the colonial markers one is going to be free ports, a crime in the whole UK, but my reference is to Scotland. I hope you've enjoyed these videos. Thank you.